This is the CFF Site's schedule analysis show where today we look at the Big 12 schedule, Mountain West Conference schedule, and the independents, UConn and Notre Dame. This is the third in a four-part series that we're going to do in schedule analysis and part of the CFF Site's preseason preview series. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF Site. And as I mentioned, we're talking Big 12, we're talking Mountain West. We're going to throw in the independent programs as well. Let's just talk schedule analysis. What should we be looking for? What should we be looking out for? So let's go ahead and get right into it. Let's go ahead and share the schedule grid for the Big 12. This one is not, I'd much rather a graphic on there to kind of show you guys the teams, but we're going to jump right on into it. Go from top to bottom like we always do, or like we have in the previous two shows. And let's just take a look at that schedule for Arizona. Any pitfalls, anything that we should look out for. Here's what I'd say. Schedule starts out great, right? You've got Hawaii, Weber State right there off the bat before you get into the conference games. For me, that's what kind of stands out. Again, I'm going to say this about the Big 12 schedule. I said it about the ACC. I'm not really sure there are real bad stretches of the Big 12 schedule. When I think scheduling for Big 12, there may be a few bad spots for some weaker teams if you're targeting players that may be on teams that are in the bottom third of the conference. I think more so we look at the schedule to see where are the really good sweet spots in the Big 12 schedule as well, right? So let's just, with that being said, let's go to Arizona State, where you're looking at the first part of that schedule. They've got Northern Arizona. They do travel to Mississippi State. I think that's the second part of that home and home series where they played at Arizona State last year. And then they do play Texas State there in week 3. What's interesting, as you look at Arizona State's non-conference schedule, I don't really think the matchup at Mississippi State is going to really present much problems anyway. So Northern Arizona at Mississippi State, Texas State, not a bad non-conference schedule right there for the Sun Devils. I think the big part as we look at this schedule is, again, we've mentioned this for a few other teams, who's going to be the running back one there for Arizona State? Will it be by committee, or will we see a leader emerge from the pack? Will that be before week 1? Will it be as the season progresses? We know that Marcus Arroyo loves to ride his running back one. But the one thing we do know, right? We know the quarterback, wide receiver combo is locked. Sam Levitt, Jordan Tyson, they're going to be probably must starts. At least Sam Levitt will be. Jordan Tyson will be in every starting lineup for week 1. Then we go into Baylor, where they have that opener against Auburn, right? That game is at home. And then Baylor goes to SMU, right? So not the easiest first 2 games of the year for Baylor. Then they get Samford, Arizona State, at Oklahoma State after that. To me, that's the toughest part of the schedule, is the first half of Baylor. You've got Auburn, you've got SMU, you've got the easy matchup against Samford, but you get Arizona State, you go to Oklahoma State, and you get Kansas State, right? So for me, after that, the schedule opens up for Baylor, but for me, the sticky part is the first half of the year. Then we look at Baylor. When you look at Baylor's, you look at BYU, they've got Portland State, they've got Stanford. That's not a bad ACC team to have to play against. I really like the way their schedule looks from week 1 all the way through week 7. When you look at that BYU schedule, Portland State, Stanford, you've got a bye mixed in there, East Carolina, Colorado, West Virginia, Arizona. I think it isn't until you get to the middle of October where it's Utah at Iowa State. You've got a bye. You've got at Texas Tech. If there's a such thing as a bad run in the Big 12, that's probably as close as you can get to it. But I love the way the BYU schedule sets up for the first half of the year. Now we go to Central Florida, where Scott Frost is back leading the Knights. And when you look at the schedule, I like the first, I love where the non-conference schedule's at. I think it's a good first 3: Jacksonville State, North Carolina A&T. And then you've got North Carolina right there. That's not a bad non-conference slate. And then you get into the Big 12 schedule. And again, really balanced. If there's a bad spot for UCF, to me, it's on the back end of the schedule where the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks at Baylor, Houston, at Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, at BYU. If there's going to be some inconsistencies, I think it's going to be more in the back end of that schedule for UCF. Then we look at Cincinnati. They open the season with that matchup against Nebraska, but two really easy matchups after that: Bowling Green and Northwestern State, followed by a bye. Then you get into the Big 12 schedule. And as you look down the line, for me, everything feels in balance there with their schedule. There's nothing that really jumps out as far as bad stretches for the Bearcats. Then we get to Colorado and Georgia Tech opener, Delaware, on the road to Houston, Wyoming. I look at Colorado's schedule and I'm like, this is a really balanced schedule for Colorado. I think it's really manageable. What I don't like about this schedule is I don't like the back end of it during the college fantasy football playoffs. You've got a bye, you've got Arizona State and at Kansas State. For me, the last 3 weeks, it's like if you're in the college fantasy football playoffs and you have a Colorado player, I think then you have to start weighing your roster options out. Let's move on to Houston, where I like the non-conference schedule for the Cougars. Stephen F. Austin, they play at Rice and they play at Oregon State. Those are really good non-conference games. And when I look at the schedule, I think it's really manageable. I don't think anything really jumps out at me as far as, hey, this is really a bad run here. Let's see if the Cougars can be improved this year under Willie Fritz, with quarterback Connor Weigman coming over from Texas A&M. Then we look at Iowa State. Here's the one thing I'll say about Iowa State, and it'll be something that I'll say about Kansas State and Kansas. As a matter of fact, the three teams that I'm going to talk about next, each of those three teams play in week 0. What does that mean? That means 3 byes for the Cyclones, 3 byes for Kansas, and 3 byes for Kansas State in this schedule. However, when I look at the Iowa State schedule, I see Iowa, where the Iowa Hawkeyes in week 2, right? So you get South Dakota in week 1, Iowa in week 2. Then you go to Arkansas State. Again, looking at the schedule, nothing really jumps out to say avoid, avoid, avoid. Then we get to Kansas. They get that matchup against Fresno State in week 0. They get the matchup against Wagner. They go to Missouri in week 2, followed by a bye. So, okay, tougher matchup against Missouri and a bye. So weeks 2 and 3 could be a little bit of a question mark. Again, looking down the schedule, down the road, I don't see where there's really bad matchups. But much like Colorado, when I look at the Kansas schedule, again, if you have any Jayhawks players for college fantasy football playoffs, there's that bye right there in week 12. Then they go to Iowa. Is that Iowa there in week 13 and Utah in week 14? So for me, that's the part of the schedule right there that I don't like. I'm sorry, at Iowa State. I had that wrong. Last 3 weeks for the Jayhawks. Bye at Iowa State, Utah last 3. For me, if there's a sticking point in the schedule, it's that, and it's in the college fantasy football playoff timeline. Kansas State, I mentioned the week 0 game, but when you look at it, 3 byes. I don't mind the rest of the schedule. I think it's manageable. I think it's good. There's one thing that I do think that does stand out, and that is when you get to week 11 for Kansas State, you got to bye at Oklahoma State, at Utah. For me, if there is a slippery slope in the Kansas State football schedule, again, last third of the schedule, it's that bye week, and it's road trips in consecutive weeks at Oklahoma State and Utah. Speaking of Oklahoma State, let's go there. And when I look at Oklahoma State, the one thing that I made note of is that I like the schedule. You've got the matchup at Oregon in week 2, okay? But UT Martin opened the year. You've got Tulsa in week 4. The good thing about Oklahoma State, well, not the good thing. The good thing about is the schedule. The one thing that we really need to know, and hopefully we find this out in week 1, week 2, and at least coming out of week 2, going into that bye, coming into week 4 against Tulsa, is Oklahoma State's one of those programs where we're not 100% sure who the starting quarterback's going to be. We're not 100% sure if we're going to have a bell cow running back one. We're not 100% sure, 100% now, like definite sure, who the wide receiver one is. And so I think for Oklahoma State, you've got to take stabs at some of those players in your draft, but I think we're going to get a lot more clarity from the Cowboys as the season unfolds and we get into and past that week 3 bye. Now let's go over to TCU. When you look at TCU, remember they have that opener against North Carolina. Doesn't scream trouble, but then you've got a bye. Abilene Christian there. Then you've got SMU. You go to Arizona State. The one thing that I note on TCU's schedule, the thing that jumps out at me are the road games. I don't think North Carolina screams trouble, but it is a Bill Belichick coach team. He is going to have the entire offseason to get ready for TCU's offense. And the one note that I have is just TCU's road games. They go to North Carolina, they go to Arizona State, they go to Kansas State. West Virginia might be the one easiest matchup of all the road games. Then they go to BYU, and they also have a matchup at Houston later on in the year. And if Fritz is going to have Houston rolling a little better this year, I think that could be a tricky matchup for TCU down. So some of TCU's tougher matchups in conference, I find, are all on the road. Something to take note of. Texas Tech, when I look at Texas Tech's schedule, great first 3 matchups. Arkansas Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State. You have to love that. But then look at the schedule after that. At Utah, bye. At Houston, right? That could be a little bit of a tricky slope, a tricky stretch right there. And then I made note also at Arizona State, Oklahoma State, at Kansas State, BYU, before ending it with UCF, bye, and West Virginia. When I look at the entirety of this Big 12 schedule grid, in my opinion, I think Texas Tech has the toughest schedule of every team in the conference. We'll see how that plays out. But for me, I think Texas Tech has the toughest schedule in the conference outside of their non-conference schedule. Then we go over to Utah. Utah, one thing, it's just, I wrote down for me in my observation when I was looking over this, good schedule. I think it's balanced. I don't really think anything stands out that says anything's overwhelmingly against them. If there was one stretch on the schedule, I would say you just kind of have to be careful on. It would probably be the second to last, that middle stretch of the season, starting in week 6, 7, 8, when it's just by Arizona State at BYU. But other than that, I love that schedule for Utah and quarterback Devin Dampier. And then West Virginia, Rich Rod taken back over at West Virginia. Good first 4 games. Robert Morris, right? You got at Ohio, you've got Pitt, which I don't think is a bad matchup. And then you go at Kansas. So I think there are 4 really decent matchups for West Virginia to start the year. But I am a little bit concerned with West Virginia after that. We have to make sure will they be settled on a quarterback? We know that there's fantasy value in Rich Rod's quarterbacks. We know that there could be value in his running back one if he stays with a bell cow. Will we get that through the first 3, 4 weeks of the season? And then if we do, the competition, in my opinion, gets a little tougher for the Mountaineers. You get Utah, you go at BYU, and then you get a bye. And then I think from there on out, the schedule's fairly balanced. But good first 4 matchups for the Mountaineers. The next three weeks is a little iffy. And then if we've got some really rock solid assets for West Virginia, I think you've got a nice balanced schedule there through the end of the year. And that takes care of the Big 12. Now, taking a look at the Big 12, again, we're going to go from left to right. We're either going top down, left to right. And we're going to start off with Air Force in the Mountain West Conference. The one thing, again, we've got a couple of teams here with a week 0 matchup. I hate to see the week 0 matchups. That means 3 byes coming up during the season. But we're going to talk about that when we get there. Air Force opener against Bucknell, then they're off before they get Utah State. That's and then they get Hawaii there in week 5, the Navy. Not a troubling schedule for me with Air Force. I think when you look at the Mountain West schedule, we have to consider every team that does play Boise State and every team that doesn't play Boise State. And I think that's a little bit of a gift if you avoid Boise State because it's one of the better defenses, if not the best defense in the conference. So that's something that we'll make note as we move forward. But Air Force, nothing really jumps out at me with Boise State. That's the team we really want to put under the microscope a little bit. We waiting for the running back one situation to unfold. So we'll keep tabs during preseason camp, but that'll be really big for us as we move into the season. Will we get a bell cow back? Likely nothing similar to what we saw with Ashton Jeanty this year, but still the possibility of a 200 plus carry running back does exist in that Boise State offense. So they get South Florida. They go to South Florida to start the year. Eastern Washington open before they get into Air Force. And then they play Appalachian State, and then they go on the road to play Notre Dame. Then after that, the second half of the season, that Boise State schedule opens up. So from a fantasy perspective, the challenge for Boise State more so is in the first half of the year, the cross-country trip to South Florida, the open date in week 3, Air Force, and we know what playing a military school, what playing an academy can do by just, them running the ball, fewer possessions in the game. Appalachian State, traditionally one of the better teams in the Sun Belt. We'll see how that shakes out this year. And then a big matchup on the road against Notre Dame. Colorado State, outside of that matchup, again, at Washington in week 1. To me, no speed bumps on the Colorado State schedule. Fresno State, again, week 0 game, 3 byes, but a balanced schedule. So I'll have that to say about Fresno State. And if they can get that run game going, that's a good schedule for Bryson Donaldson. Hawaii. Let's look at Hawaii's schedule. Hawaii with a week 0 matchup. What does that mean? 3 byes, but also consider this too. And I said this just a few minutes ago. Hawaii avoids Boise State on the schedule. So even though when you look back and we look at Fresno State, 3 byes and they get Boise State, Hawaii, 3 byes, no Boise State. So I think that does work in favor of Hawaii's schedule. And outside of the week 0, matchup, I really love Hawaii's schedule. Nevada at Penn State in week 1. But, when I look at Sacramento State, Middle Tennessee at Western Kentucky, weeks 2, 3, 4, that's a very favorable non-conference schedule. The question is, will we really have any fantasy assets by that time? Because if we're waiting to see what happens and unfolds in week 1, I don't expect Wolfpack to do much in that opener at Penn State. It may not be until that second week against Sacramento State that we see what Nevada has, and fantasy owners then roll in the dice on week 3. Then we go to New Mexico. When I look at the first half of the schedule, you've got road games against Michigan in week 1, a road trip to UCLA on week 3, an open date in week 4, and then you've got Boise State, a road trip in week 7. For me, I think this is one of the tougher schedules in the Mountain West Conference. And I know New Mexico, they had that high-powered offense last year under Bronco Mendenhall. But matchups on the road against Michigan, UCLA, Boise State, they go to UNLV, and they go to Air Force. When I look at the Mountain West schedule, for me, this one stands out as possibly the toughest schedule in the conference. Then we go over to San Diego State. Those two, the first 4 non-conference games, I think 3 of them are decent matchups. You've got Stony Brook. You go to Washington State, you get Cal at home, you go to Northern Illinois. I don't think that's a bad non-conference schedule. So, and the conference schedule from there for me looks pretty balanced. San Jose State, again, we're expecting a lot of offense from San Jose State. But the road matchup against Texas in week 2, little bit of a watch out, right? Could we see Texas maybe break out and give up some garbage points in the end? San Jose State's offense is certainly built for that. But I think you may be a little cautious with your San Jose State's assets in week 2. I know a lot of people will be. And then there's that bye in week 3, right? So outside of that week 2, 3 stretch, I really like the San Jose State schedule. UNLV, we'll look at the non-conference slate. You've got Sam Houston, you've got UCLA, you've got Idaho State, you got Miami of Ohio. Maybe UCLA is a little bit of a tricky one, but outside of that, again, very balanced from there on out. Utah State, UTEP, A&M, Air Force, UTEP, A&M, Vanderbilt, and McNeese as their non-conference schedule. They play two SEC schools on the road, so I think there's a little bit of a watch out there with Utah State. Air Force in week 3. Remember, if the Falcons can control the game, it limits possessions, right? And then you've got that open date right there in week 6. So I feel like if you're targeting Utah State players in the draft, it's a little weigh your options because A&M, Air Force, Vanderbilt bye week. When you look at the first 6 weeks of the schedule, that's for the first 6 weeks right there. So just a little heads up with Utah State. And of course, we're going to end it with Wyoming. You've got that matchup against Utah and Colorado over there after matchups against Akron and Northern Iowa to start the year. And then you get into the Mountain West schedule. Again, you avoid Boise State. The question is, will Wyoming have any fantasy assets for us? So the schedule can look good after they get past Utah and Colorado. The question is, are there going to be any fantasy assets for us to really draft? And that takes us through the Mountain West Conference. Now, let's take a look at Notre Dame and UConn, and we'll start at UConn. And I'm going to have them pulled up in a graphic with with the teams from the Pac-12 because I couldn't find a graphic with just UConn and Notre Dame. I wanted to give you guys some context by looking at some of the teams. And so, with UConn, for me, nothing really jumps out. I mean, UConn, independent, a mixed bag, balanced schedule, right? But let's look and focus real quick on Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's just one of those programs. They're just going to play a really good schedule every year. Matchup at Miami and off the first and second weeks before they play Texas A&M. Should be an easy matchup against Purdue. It's not going to be easy going down to Fayetteville and playing at Arkansas. Then they get Boise State, right? North Carolina State, USC. Now, for me, when I look at Notre Dame's schedule right there, I say, okay, at Miami could be tough. A&M could be tough. At Arkansas could be tricky. USC at home, that could be tough. Even though but when I look at when they get past USC, Boston College, Navy, Pitt, Syracuse, Stanford, I just don't see an obstacle on the schedule. I think Notre Dame's schedule sets up really good for them all year. When I look at the schedule, I do not see an overwhelming team, anybody that's going to overwhelm Notre Dame. If there's going to be, in my opinion, a matchup that screams defensive struggle a little bit, it might be the matchup against A&M early on in the year, but I'm not a big fan of Arkansas this year, even though that's a road game, could be tricky, and I just don't know how good USC's defense is going to be. I don't think Boise State's going to have enough muscle, and for me, the wild card is Miami right out of the gate in week 1, but when you get past USC, for me, I think Notre Dame down the stretch, especially if you have maybe like a Jeremiah Love. We'll see how CJ Carr can progress as the starting quarterback. That's a really good stretch run if you have a Notre Dame asset to end the year. So that's going to do it for the schedule analysis for the Big 12, the Mountain West Conference, and the Independents. That's 3 shows down, and one more to go. On the next show, we're going to look at the SEC. We're going to look at the Sun Belt, and that's going to be the 4th and final part of the schedule analysis here as part of our preseason preview series. But that's it. I'm going to wrap up this show. We've got one more to go. Again, my name's Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site, and I'll see you guys when we're talking SEC Sun Belt schedules.